Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. A while back, I was driving home from work when I started thinking about primary dominant function in harmonic locrian. You know, like a normal person. Anyway, I played around with the ideas for a bit, and when I got home, I went straight to my piano and played this. And it was awesome. My roommate, who's also a composer, even came over to ask me what the heck I was playing. So what was I playing, and why was it so exciting to me? Well, to understand that, we need to rewind a bit and talk about dominant function. Dominant function chords are really unstable and they want to resolve somewhere. The classic example is the appropriately named 5 dominant 7, which has a really strong pull back to the root of the key. That resolution is the basis of a lot of music theory. It's kind of a big deal. But the 5 chord isn't the only dominant function chord. In major, we also have the 7 minor 7 flat 5, which also resolves back to the root. In both cases, that resolution is driven by the same 2 notes. First, there's the leading tone, which sits a half step below the root of the key and pulls upward. The leading tone does a lot of the heavy lifting here, but it's aided by the 4th degree of the scale, which wants to fall down to the 3rd. Combining these two is like a huge arrow pointing straight back to the 1 chord. But it's more than that. In addition to the individual jobs each of the notes is doing, they're also a tritone apart, a really dissonant interval in its own right. This means that, without even knowing the key center, dominant chords still point you home, because even without context, the tritone needs to resolve, and that opens up whole new harmonic worlds. One of the first things it gives us is the secondary dominant. There's only one dominant 7th chord in any given key, so each of them points you to a specific chord even if that chord isn't the root. For instance, in D major, we might play an E7, and then an A7, which would go back to D. The A7's a primary dominant function chord, but that E7 doesn't belong in the key of D at all. But it does exist in the key of A, and even though we're not in the key of A, it still points back to the only home it knows. Well, that's not quite true, and this is where things start to get messy. Let's take a look at the notes in A7. We have A, C sharp, E, and G. We can ignore the A and the E for now, though, and just look at the tritone from C sharp to G. If we take the C sharp up an octave, we still have a tritone. And C sharp is the same thing as D flat, so we can rewrite it like this, and then add in a couple more notes, and we have E flat 7. Which is weird because we're still using the tritone from A7. And if the 2 chords share a tritone, then they should be able to resolve to the same place, right? Well, let's try it. Yeah, I think that works pretty well. Of course, E flat can also resolve to A flat, but it doesn't have to. It can also pretend to be an A7 and go straight to a D chord. This is called a tritone substitution, and it works because the 2 dominant chords share a tritone. In a normal dominant resolution, that tritone resolves inward, but here it's going out instead. In fact, every single dominant 7 chord out there has one of these mirrors with its root a half step above the target chord. The resolution's a bit smoother because the bass is gliding down instead of jumping, but the sound is just as strong and just as powerful. Now let's go back to the minor 7 flat 5. Here the tritone is between the root and the flat 5, and if we resolve it inward we get this, a major chord whose root is a half step up. It's a nice sound, but there's not really a whole lot we can do with it. At least, not as a dominant function chord. However, if we take this 7th degree and lower it another half step, we get this, the diminished 7th, the most flexible dominant function chord out there. The diminished 7th is, in some ways, a very similar chord to the minor 7 flat 5. It really wants to resolve up a half step. However, it has another trick up its sleeve. It's symmetrical. It's all minor thirds from top to bottom, which means that our C sharp diminished 7 has all the same notes as E diminished 7, G diminished 7, and A sharp diminished 7. And that means that when we play one of them, we can resolve it like it's any of them. It's kinda like the tritone substitution from earlier, except all the different chords sound exactly the same. So C sharp diminished 7 can happily resolve to D, F, A flat, or B. And that's not it. Diminished 7th chords are so unstable that it's really easy to squeeze weird resolutions out of them. Let's look at C sharp diminished 7 again. We know that C sharp and G are a tritone, but the other 2 notes, E and B flat, are also a tritone. If we keep the C sharp where it is and resolve that tritone instead, we get C sharp major. This is a trick called a common tone resolution where a diminished 7th chord resolves to a major chord with the exact same root. And again, since each diminished 7th is actually 4 different diminished 7ths, you've got a lot of options here. Anyway, the point is this, the tritone always resolves. It's a simple statement, but it's the underpinning of pretty much all functional harmony. And because of that, any chord with a tritone in it can serve just fine as a dominant function chord, which brings us back to that thing at the beginning. Here we've got 4 notes: A flat, D flat, E flat, and G. D flat is the same as C sharp, and as we've mentioned, C sharp is a tritone away from G, so we've got all the ingredients for a dominant resolution. The C sharp moves up to D, the G moves down to F sharp, the E flat moves down to D, and the A flat moves up to an A. Meanwhile, the bass moves from A flat to D, which is another tritone, giving this whole thing a really spooky sounding feel even as it resolves. Check it out. Tritones, y'all. They're amazing. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you want to help make these videos possible, please consider supporting 12-Tone on Patreon. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and keep on rockin'.